Welcome, everybody. My name is Travis, and this is Self Publishing by Design. And this particular episode is edited by design. I'm sitting here with Nikki and Robin. Both of these ladies are editors. In fact, Nikki was my editor for both of my books. And Robin, I haven't officially met you until just now, and I'm so excited to have you on the show as well. Just to give a little background, this series that I'm doing, Self Publishing by Design, is kind of in tandem with my own Kickstarter campaign for my latest book. And so we're going to be having some giveaways. And if you're registered for this event and you go in and back my campaign, I'll be giving away a copy of Nikki's book. And I'll also be giving away a $25 credit toward Robin's editing services, which covers about 30 minutes, I believe. Is that right,
Yes,
Robin?
that is right. That is it.
Yeah. So stay tuned. We'll be talking a little bit more about that in the end. But we're going to get on with the show now, and I'm going to let Nikki and Robin introduce themselves and just tell a little bit more about who they are and what they do. So, Nikki, we'll start with you if you don't mind.
Not at all. So first of all, Travis, thank you for having us. I think this is going to be a fun interview. So for those who don't know me, I've been in the indie children's book author space for maybe 3.5, 4 years now. And I kind of transitioned from being an author to an author illustrator to being an illustrator for others, to being an editor for others, to being a social media marketing person. So I've worn a lot of hats in this. And for about 1 year to 2 years, I was heavily involved in editing. So I have a lot of experience and expertise in that regard, which is why we're here. But I also have the perspective of someone who also does book formatting and design and also illustrations. So I think my perspective will kind of be oriented in that regard, which I think is going to be interesting and different from Robin's. And then also, I should mention that Robin is my mother, the best mom on the planet. And she also is, she's the reason I developed the way that I did, and I have the knowledge and know-how that I do. And at a certain point, I think it was about 2.5 years ago, I brought her into the fold. And so she'll tell you everything that she wants to say about her experience, but I did want to mention that for those who don't know. I hope I did that justice. So I'm going to call my mom Robin for the purpose of this interview. So Robin, would you like
I'll call you Mom, Robin. Just kidding.
Some adult kids call their parents by their first names all the time, so it's not so strange. So this has been quite a journey for me. I spent a lot of years editing for other people and myself, not in the children's book space, certainly not indie, which didn't exist in those days. So I started out by, working with people on their doctorates and making their dissertations really well written, and so on, and my own as well. But in 2019, my daughter told me about the indie book space, children's book space, and it sounded interesting to me. So I was at her home for Thanksgiving, November 2019, and she gave me a whole crash course on what's going on with Facebook author groups, and how she's getting clients and what she's doing for them. And so I just I had an in-person training with her, not knowing that I wouldn't see her again for another 2 years because of COVID. And it was a perfect time to get into it because a lot of people were writing when they were home. People needed editors more than ever, which is great. And just around that time, I had retired from my pretty long career as an occupational therapist in the school systems, which I started in 1987. And then I also had spent a lot of years as a professor of occupational therapy, also working with students on their papers and helping them edit their work. So editing, I was not a stranger to editing, but I needed to learn all things children's book. So Nikki did a great job with that. She knows my strengths, and she also she didn't know though how much I was going to enjoy doing rhyming stories and getting into meter editing. We didn't start with that, but I got into it pretty quickly because one of the first people who sent me a manuscript had a little bit of a rhyme in their story. So I dipped a toe into that big ocean, and I started to really enjoy it. And I discovered that I really have a knack for it. So in the last 2 years, I have edited 150 stories, and 100 of them were rhyming. People need it.
Wow.
They contact me for it. And so I started to talk of myself as a children's book editor specializing in meter and rhyme. So that is the story of how I became a children's book editor, and hope that I will be doing it for many years to come. And working with my daughter is just a dream come true. We got to know each other in ways that we didn't before, and it's just a lot of extra fun. Besides that, Nikki is my only daughter out of 4 kids, but so I think that pretty well covers it and explains why we're both here today. So,
Nikki, which one are you in the lineup of siblings?
I'm the second to oldest. I have an older brother,
yeah.
Then it's me, and then my 2 younger brothers. And I'll throw out the fact that my mom had us within 4 years. So
less than 4 years.
Less than 4 years.
Okay. And no twins.
No
twins. That's a whole other story. Nikki has twins. I don't.
Not until
my father was a
generation.
My father was
a generation,
twin, right? And my husband's father was a twin, and that's why my daughter. So.
Yeah, I have heard that it skips a generation. In fact, I was just talking to my kids just before this. We were having bedtime and reading a Bible story with twins, Jacob and Esau. So it's funny that comes up. Yeah. So this is great, Robin. I did take a peek at your website and saw that you had quite a background in both occupational therapy and editing, and I was wondering how they connected. So that's great that you connected the two for us.
I'm going to be talking more about the specific types of books that I get, that allow me to use that expertise. It's been very exciting. People are in the indie book space are writing a lot of books about disability and death and dying and loss that traditional publishers have not wanted to touch. And so that opens up a whole lot of, exciting work for me because people are writing these amazing books.
And I'll also add that my mom Robin has been my editor for my Sensory Stories books, which I was going to talk about later, but since you brought it up, her occupational therapy background, she was the best subject matter expert for my books and has literally made them what they are with me. So.
And Nikki asked me to write the introduction to her Alexander the Avoider book, in which I write about being her mother while she was having sensory avoiding problems and what that was like. So I said, "Do you really need me to write this intro?" And she said, "Yes, you're going to write this intro." So I did.
Please. I asked nicely.
Yes, nicely.
Well, I think it's really great that you both have such a good focus on disabilities of different types, because both of my books were based on a disability because my daughter is deaf and she's the recipient of cochlear implants. And of course, Nikki knows that, and maybe Robin does too, if you're familiar with my books. So I think it's really great what you're both doing and helping to bring awareness to so many different disabilities through your own books as well as editing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out this fun fact that when I was editing your book, I read it to my mom, to Robin.
Yeah,
she's very familiar.
Yeah.
We actually bounce our editing off of each other a lot, especially when it comes to meter and rhyme, because it's always helpful to get another ear, even when you're an expert. So yeah, fun fact.
So here's a fun fact. I just edited a rhyming story about inclusive playgrounds, about all different kids who play in them, and one of the characters in the book is a kid who deals with deafness, but it didn't say anything about cochlear implants, and I needed two more another couplet in there because it was missing a couplet. So I said, I'm going to put in something about cochlear implants. So I did.
That's awesome.
All right.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, let's get on to the questions that I have for you. The first one is, I think a lot of, especially first-time authors, they think it's okay to skip the editing portion. They think, oh, this is just a children's book. There's only, a few hundred words. I think I can handle it myself. Right. So what do you say to that? Why is it so important for even children's authors to get their book professionally edited?
So I think we decided that I was going to answer this question when Nikki and I.
Yeah, we decided to tag team this interview so that we wouldn't be repeating each other's answers. So, Robin.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is people who are writing books are very good at writing, and they probably are very good at editing on some levels too. The issue, though, is that there are a lot of things to keep in mind when you look at a book and what it needs editing-wise. And some of those things might be missed by even the best writer and an author who can edit their own material. So, people kind of focus on the spelling, grammar, and punctuation. And there are even programs that people can use on the computer to catch spelling errors and all of that. So why would you need an editor when you can very nicely, pay a very small amount for a program that will do that for you? But, editors do a lot more than that. And, what I always think about with a story is, not only the gestalt, how it all hangs together, but also, are there words that are being repeated? Recently an author gave me a non-rhyming piece that repeated certain words over and over again and didn't even realize that was happening. And so then I did a word count and I was like, oh my gosh, 12 times this word was mentioned. And it wasn't and or the, it was like, really meaty words that could be, replaced with synonyms and sound much more, interesting and colorful and just descriptive. So, this is something that this author would never even have thought of doing. And even I was surprised when I looked at how many times the words were repeated. So that was something I was able to do. And the final product was amazing compared to before. It was competent and okay and fine. But we were able to make it spectacular by just making that small adjustment. So that's one thing that an editor can do. And as Nikki mentioned, you don't really, if you're familiar with your own material, you don't notice that because you're so used to the way it is. So that's one of the things that an editor can do for a children's book author. We're not even talking about more complicated manuscripts. So that's one. And the other thing is a very interesting thing that I've noticed in the 2 years I've been editing, that the hardest thing for people to get right is hyphenated words and compound words. People will, like daytime, they'll put day and time, or, and they don't know that it needs to have a hyphen. And even me, I have to look it up sometimes, even though what's the name of that program that we use? Grammarly tells me that I looked up like 7 million words in the last, I checked 7 million words within the last 2 years. But yeah, so that's something that is very subtle, but it's the difference between really being professional and just being okay. And everybody wants their book to be as professional as it can be. So, one interesting thing, I found out that backyard can be as 2 words if it's a noun, but if you want to say backyard picnic, you have to put it as 1 word, a compound word. These are very, what's the word? Like random things that you wouldn't just know, and you might have to look them up. But I get paid to edit, so I look them up.
we were talking earlier about potential detrimental outcomes of someone not hiring an editor. And I think Robin had a really strong example of something like that. So would you like to just give an example of what might happen if a person skips the editing process?
Well, for example, I think what you're referring to is that funny word hag. There was a like talking about cultural sensitivity in wording. So there was a very talented author of mine who does a lot of rhyming stories, and he likes to do things that have to do with fairy tales. So he wrote a whole rhyming story about the different kinds of fairy tales, and tell me a story. Could you tell me about this? Could you tell me about that? And he mentioned the word hag, and I found out that the word hag is a derogatory term in the current climate to put women down. It's just not. So we use the word hag in fairy tales, and it's fine. But if you want to have a contemporary story and put it out there to be reviewed on Amazon and want nobody to have anything bad to say about it, you wouldn't want to use the word hag. And so when I did his edit, I wrote him a little note about what it says on the internet about the word hag. And so and he was like, oh yeah, I never even thought of that. Let's not use it.
Yeah. So I think the point here is that if that is something that is overlooked, the author just doesn't know that that's potentially an issue. They launch the book, and then there's some potential backlash because of cultural lack of awareness or any other number of things that could set the book up for failure. You can't come back necessarily from really serious issues like that one. The same as you can come back from a book that has a couple of grammar issues. Very easy to relaunch a book that has some grammar issues, and you hire an editor. Someone's like, oh, did you hire an editor? No, there's some grammar issues here. Great, I'll go hire an editor now, and I'll relaunch my book. No biggie. But if you have an issue that maybe just has a cultural unawareness to it, and someone finds that issue and calls it out in Amazon review, in the media anywhere, that could create a huge problem for your book. You don't necessarily know that.
Yeah, it could taint not only the book, but your whole image.
Exactly. Yeah. And, unfortunately, there's someone who's a pretty active member in one of the larger author groups. And that happened to him recently. I don't know if you saw that one, Travis, but he put out an apology, and I think he caught it fairly quickly before it got really far. But if he didn't catch it, if someone didn't point it out, and then it got, brought up somehow out of that inner circle of other authors, that could really be a problem. So editing is just, it's really important.
Absolutely.
And once something is in the ether, it's in the ether. It's not, you can't take it back, with social media the way it is nowadays, and even media, so it's always better to, have the stitch in time instead of saving 9,
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that's really great. So the next question kind of builds on that, talking about how much we should self-edit, how much work, how much proofreading should we do before our manuscripts are passed on to a professional editor.
Did I say I would take that, or did you say?
Either of us could take it, but we did say that you were going to, so go ahead, and I'll chime in if there's anything else.
So, okay, I'm remembering now. In my opinion, a person should edit and edit and edit until they do not feel there's anything more they could do by themselves without a professional editor in the mix. However, in that editing process, which I'm going to call self-editing for this, it's very important to get outside opinions and perspectives, again, before you hire the editor. So we call that beta editing, beta feedback. And so I'll give an example. I wrote my first sensory book called Rosalie the Seeker, but initially the name was supposed to be Little Rosalie Has SPD. And I put it out into a couple of spaces and I was like, hey, looking for some, but actually, I don't even think I was saying I'm looking for some feedback. The person came out and offered it without me asking. I just showed the cover. And the person said, hey, I would be very happy to give you feedback. The way that you wrote your title, there are a couple of things that aren't quite in line with the disability awareness space right now. You're not using identity first language, you're using person first. So you're saying with SPD instead of, well, I don't know how it would go with SPD as opposed to other things. But she said, and also putting the word little with regard to a female character kind of like minimizes her. And that's different than the male character, which, oftentimes has more powerful adjectives associated. So anyway, I was very, very lucky that this person offered the feedback because I, at that point in time, was so kind of green and new as an author that I didn't even know I needed an editor. And so I sent her my manuscript. She read it. She gave me so many important points. And I completely rewrote my manuscript based on that feedback. So very important to get beta feedback. You never know what you're going to get from that. And then once you get that beta feedback, do another round of revising and self-editing. And just keep going until you feel there's nothing more you can do on your own. That is my personal recommendation, and that's what I do. And I do have an editor now. I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
Robin is my editor. And what I personally found with the way that we've been doing it is I'll do exactly what I just said, write my manuscripts, get the beta feedback, revise, self-edit. And then I'll go to Robin and I'll say, okay, can you look at this from a developmental perspective? And she's also my subject matter expert. So at that point in time, I get that feedback, and then there ends up being several more rounds of revision.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how the beta reader feedback is totally different from the editor feedback. It's like in two different worlds. Sometimes they might intermingle, but and you get some surprises. But for the most part, you cannot expect to get all your feedback from either an editor or a beta reader. I think you need both streams, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Nikki?
What do you think is the difference? What kind of feedback do you think we see from beta readers as opposed to editors?
Well, in my perspective, beta readers are coming at it as consumers. They're going to tell you their emotional reaction to it, or they're going to get their kids to give feedback, and it's going to come from this more emotional place. And editors are much more tactical, and they're coming from, their knowledge of English and possibly psychology. If there's I have a psychology degree, so that always came into the mix for me. Robin has a background in early childhood development, so that comes into the mix for her, but it's much more tactical. In my experience, the feedback I get from beta readers is usually more of an emotional response. It's like, this is not resonating with me for this reason. It has to do with their emotional response.
Yeah. And a good way to explain it is by comparing it to movies that are being reviewed. So what do the critics say about the movie versus what does the audience say about the movie?
And that's a good example. Analogy.
So some people might, be much more interested in what the critics say because they're like intellectual people that they want to, be educated by a movie. Other people would be like, well, I want something that's fun, and I want to know that I'm going to have a good time when I go to a movie. So I'm going to be much more interested in what the audience had to say about it. So, but actually, there's a place for both.
There's definitely a place for both.
That's good. Before we get much further, I just want to remind anyone that's watching, you can comment and ask questions. And I believe you have to go directly into YouTube to do that. And if you're watching on my website, there should be a link to go to the YouTube feed to leave any comments or questions you may have. I've had about 25 people signed up, but I know many people are going to be watching later in the day. I know we're doing this kind of at an awkward time for most people. So those questions may come later. But anyways, the next question I had is a little off topic. So I'm going to skip that and go on to the next one, which is what are the different types of editing? And you kind of already touched on that a little bit. So maybe you can just kind of expound on that and explain what the different phases are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to preface this answer by just saying that every editor is going to have a slightly different process with slightly different terminology. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of overlap and similarity as well. So if I'm calling something and you're hiring an editor and they use a different term, don't let that throw you off. But in my editing process, there's the self-editing, which is what I just talked about, and that includes the beta feedback. The next step is typically when you look for an editor and you ask for a quote, and you're essentially going to send them your manuscript and ask them to give you their professional opinion on whether or not you need a developmental edit. You might not. So there are some people who are very good with their instincts, and they'll put together just a really strong manuscript. The plot is solid. There are no gaps. There are no inconsistencies. But you would want a professional to review your manuscript and give you their recommendation of whether or not you need a developmental edit. So I'm going to call that a developmental review. And usually most editors will do that for free. It's just they're going to read your manuscript and they're going to say, I'm recommending that you do a developmental edit versus your story, everything about it is solid. You can move to the next step. So if you need a developmental edit and the person tells you this, usually that comes with a quote. But that part of the process focuses on plot holes, gaps, inconsistencies. And there's a lot to it, but it really has a lot to do with, not just the words that you're using, but the actual story itself and how the story is written. Moving from that step, assuming, it's completely solid, then you would go into what I used to call when I was doing editing regularly is basic editing, which includes spelling, grammar, punctuation, and it's more basic. It's clarity, flow, decreasing word repetition, like Robin said earlier. But it's not really focused on the plot so much as the basic execution in the words that were chosen, the formation of the sentences. Sometimes someone might use kind of awkward phrasing. You might want to fix that, things like that. That's basic editing. And then there's another phase, which usually comes at the very end, which I used to call or refer to as proofreading or copy editing. And in my world, when I was doing this, it would be someone sending me their final PDF. So their illustrator finished, their book formatter finished everything. It's ready to go. And now we're just looking for things that were overlooked. A comma that's missing, an accidental, error in punctuation, an extra word that was overlooked. I know Stacy Bauer had that issue happen last year, I think, after editor after editor looked at her book. There was still an extra word that somehow snuck in and she caught it last minute. So that's what my last step usually would be. And actually, when I was doing editing, that was usually a part of what I offered. So I would say, here's my edit. Send to your illustrator, your formatter, get that stuff in there. And I am more than happy to do one final review of your PDF when it's done. So that's my overall process for editing. Robin, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I have something very interesting to add. While you were talking about developmental editing, sometimes developmental editing could be very inexpensive, but make a big impact. Not add a lot to the cost of the editing. And I'll give you my favorite example is the end of a story. Like everything is perfect with the story, except it kind of falls flat at the end. Either doesn't have enough details, like there was that story about the dog who was mistreated by the boy who owned the dog, and then the dog saves the boy's life, and the boy's in the hospital. A lot of details of all the angst and suffering that happened, and then in the end of the story, it was just like, oh, the boy realized he was wrong, and they lived happily ever after. So, what I said to the author is, I could, for just a few bucks, I can give you more details at the end of the story, and give people a little bit more enjoyment of how things kind of worked out in the end. Yeah. Because you gave so many details about the suffering. So why not also have some detail? And also, it was just a nice way to end the story, and it rounded it out. And, for just a few bucks, I was able to give her that developmental edit, and it really made a huge difference. And there were other cases too, where I said or even the author would say to me, I know that something's missing from the end of the story. Can you please flesh it out? Can you please figure out what we can do? And it doesn't take long at all, because the rest of the story was perfect. You just wanted to add in those last few paragraphs with ending with an oomph, Yeah. So developmental editing doesn't have to be expensive, especially if it's strategic. Yep. And something that can make a huge difference. So that's just.
I'll throw in another example, although I'm not going to give. The person is still working on putting their book together, so I don't feel comfortable sharing too many details. But sure. I did an edit. It was a book written in prose. And the title of the book had a certain word in it. And then the whole book kind of didn't mention that word much. It mentioned it like once towards the end. And I essentially gave advice that concept should be woven in. The concept was in the story. It was the word that wasn't. And it because the word wasn't in there, it was kind of like the person reading had to connect more dots than you would want them to. So it's towards the end, I said, look, I recommend, so I gave her my edit. I said, I recommend trying to weave this in. If you want me to do that, to make some recommendations as to how you should weave it in, I can do that. She took me up on the offer. I didn't charge her any more for that. But to Robin's point, you can potentially have a very simple basic developmental edit. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's more about what type of editing you're doing. It has a lot more to do with how the story conceptually plays out in the way it was written.
I'm thinking back to my first book, Ada and the Helpers, and I had hired a guy to, I guess it would be the developmental edit then, and he did a great job of telling me that I was not forming the introduction of the main character so well. So I had to go back and rewrite kind of the beginning of the story. And once I did that a few times, that's when I ended up passing it on to Nikki to handle the basic edit. But what about, like, I know you talked about meter and rhyme. Does that kind of fit in with basic edit, or is that a completely different ballgame?
You read my mind, because I was going to say that I was just waiting for you to finish so I could say, and then like we must have been telepathic here. The developmental editing is part of meter editing, because every time you change a word to make the rhythm better, or you have to change a whole couplet, two lines, because the words were not right, they were near rhymes and you wanted perfect rhymes. The minute you change any wording, it changes the whole meaning of the story. And so you have to be very careful with meter editing. And authors who come to me for meter editing are very well aware of this. And they have to be willing to give up something in order to get a more rhythmic and better rhymed story. But what happens though with that is that you can add in developmental edits while you're changing the words. You can make something different and better. But you have to hope that the author intended to go in that direction, and or is comfortable with that fitting into their total vision for the story. So it gets complicated. But I also think that it's good to have a meter editor who's not only paying attention to the way it sounds and rhymes and the rhythm, but also to what is being conveyed with those changes. And we can I'll give you another example. There was one time when an author came to me and said, I'm really not comfortable with this entire verse, 4 lines. Could we change it? And because I offer 30 minutes of follow-up editing as part of the total price. There was no problem. I reworded it. And then at the end, she said to me, that is my favorite, verse of the entire story now. So you never know. It just turned out very well. So, and authors should say when they're not comfortable with how something sounds, when you give them the delivered edit. Meter editing is very, very complicated, but that's what makes it fun. And that's why Grammarly told me that I checked 99% more creative words than any other, than most of their customers.
Wow.
So, and I use RhymeZone. Nikki told me about RhymeZone, which is a free website for looking up.
I'm very familiar with that. Yeah.
Right? But I don't recommend authors use, depending on RhymeZone instead of an editor. I recommend them using that and then coming to an editor afterwards. But so the metered editing is the most fun. I enjoy that more than anything else. And there's one other thing about rhyming. There are things that you can put in with one word that give you an entire picture that would take you a few sentences in prose. So meter is very powerful for that. And it's also, I think those books are the ones that are read over and over again, the rhyming books. I think that people should write in rhyme, and people should be interested in buying rhyming books for the kids in their life, because it's an easy way to learn something and to remember something if it's in rhyme. For example, my Carl's Fish Farm story that I did for somebody, which was about fish farming, very complicated stuff, but it was cute when it was rhymed, and she gave it to me in rhyme, and I metered it. I hope the government liked it. It was a government project. And so I think that there are a lot of possibilities with rhyme that are not available with prose, and people should keep doing it. People should keep writing in rhyme. And
Absolutely.
Then people should come to me and get it metered.
Yeah, it's interesting because writing in rhyme and then reading in rhyme, you kind of have this singing voice, which is really good for kids and adults as well who are hard of hearing. And so that's something that I definitely wanted to include with my first book to kind of help with the readers who were hard of hearing. But it's interesting that there aren't so many publishers out there who will take rhyming books, and I understand why. It's you get so many submissions that are probably not good at rhyme and meter, and also the challenge of translating to other languages and things like that. But I do wish there were more publishers that would be willing to take up rhyming books, because, like you said, it's something that we definitely need and should continue to produce.
But we have the indie book space now, so it's going to be more. It's going to be easier to get those books out there. Mentioning foreign language, though, I was going to say that I also have quite a number of authors who send me books, about stuff going on in other countries. Mexican quinceañera, all these things where they put foreign language words into the English. So they, and so I really believe that an editor is good for that, because the author is fluent in the language that they stuck into the English. I'm fluent. I'm even more fluent in English than they are. But the editor can figure out how the flow of the words works when you're sticking a foreign language into English, more than is normally done in day-to-day speech. This is because it's in a book for a particular reason. So I find that I get a lot of of books with foreign language words. And on cultural topics that are so exciting to me that I feel like I've been all over the world just editing these stories and having to look things up online. So when I did the quinceañera story, I had to look up all the names of the dances that were mentioned in there, and I actually watched videos of the dances, and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
So so that's another thing that an editor can do for you, because the person who wrote the book knows English, but they're fluent in the language that they're sticking in, and yet something didn't gel in the way those two languages were put together, and I was able to smooth that out.
I have a question from a reader that I'm going to see if it'll pop up here on the screen for us. Is it ever too late to get an editor? I have a book that I also illustrated with watercolors, and I thought my book was ready to go to print minus final formatting. Is it okay to seek an editor now?
Okay.
So is there ever a point when it's too late, I guess you could say? She said, you may have already answered my question, so we'll see what you say.
We did not answer this question. It is an excellent question. The answer is no. It is never too late. Well, let me take that back for a quick second. If you print your books in China and you get 5,000 copies printed, and then you hire an editor, you're going to be in a bit of a pickle if someone finds an issue. And actually, it broke my heart the other day because a friend of mine who recently printed her books found an issue where they took their child's name out of the book, put it in a different name, and the child's name was left in one spot. So she found a way to be okay with the that result, but that's obviously an issue. But no, it's not ever too late. It's just not ideal to do illustrations first. But if you are in a situation where you've done your illustrations and you're ready to move ahead and someone goes, hey, have you edited? Not too late. Hire an editor. I think Katie Weaver would not mind me telling her this, her story about this. She was about to launch her book. What's the name of her book? It's
When the Sky Roars.
When the Sky Roars.
Yeah.
I love that book, and I edited it, and I should know the title. So she was ready to go. She had she's her own illustrator. She was ready to go to print with it. And she posted something in one of the author groups, and someone went to her privately and said, hey, have you hired an editor? There's something a little off here. So that she contacted me kind of frantic that day. And I was able to, over the week, like she was just ready to go. I think she was pregnant at the time, like practically ready to give birth. And so she just needed it to be done. So I came in at the last second, basically, and edited it, and we got it all fixed up, and kind of no harm, no foul. But I think had she gone to print and gotten 5, 10, whatever 1,000 copies of that book before, and by the way, this was a meter edit. This was not an issue with grammar, spelling, and punctuation. This was metering issues. Had she gone to print with that, she would have probably felt like a gut punch if someone gave her that feedback after the fact. So you definitely want to get your changes in and your edits done before you actually physically print anything, if possible. But it sounds like, Tanya, that you are in a pretty good spot to get an editor in. The reason it's not ideal to get an editor after illustrations is because you end up being trapped a little bit by what's in the graphic. So what you want is you want your words to be exactly what you want your words to be, and then have the graphics tell that story visually, and not the other way around. And I've actually done editing for people where their illustration work was done. This is an example. Katie's was an example too. But one example, and this wasn't an issue with her book, but another book I edited where the illustrations were done, it was a metered story, and there were certain words I had to essentially like shoehorn in because of the illustrations, even though it wasn't what I would have gone with if the illustrations hadn't been done yet. So
so it's a bigger problem with rhyming stories. Rhyming stories is much better if you can do it, get the metered editing before the illustrations. But either way, Nikki and I both do it no matter what. If lots of people contact me after they have their illustrations. But there's one more thing that I wanted to mention, and that is you always have in your back pocket that you can do a revised version of your book. And I don't think that Maria Kamalaku is going to mind if I mention, because she posted it in the author groups, that she did a complete revision of Sky Cloud City, and she had me edit the revision, and she won a prize. The book won a prize. So she also happened very kindly to mention that she thinks it's in large degree because of my editing, which I love. I love when she says that. But it's just showing you that the story is never over if you want it not to be over. You can do a revised version of a book. But of course, you're not going to revise the book for just one small thing. But if you feel like it needs an overhaul and you're willing to pay for an editor, you can win a prize. So,
yeah. So you can kind of basically resubmit it now that you have a new copyright date and possibly win a prize. Yeah.
It has a whole new cover. It looks like a different book. Nikki mentioned that.
And there are a lot of people who re-release books with different covers. I've seen that happen a lot.
Yeah. And sometimes that's necessary. The first seminar that I did last week was about book covers, and there's some instances where books could really benefit from having a new cover done even after publishing. So, I actually found a typo on my book after I had 1,000 books printed. Luckily, it's only in my bio. And it's a very small typo. That's something that I never had Nikki look at, and I should have.
Not my fault.
Yeah.
So that reminds me, Nikki, I'm going to make sure you get the final PDFs for my book before I send. Either Nikki or Robin will be looking at my book before I send it to print this time. But yeah, I think those are other portions of the book that maybe the author doesn't think about. The bio, the copyright page, the blurb dedications
comes up a lot, but also worksheets, or sometimes people have message to parent if it's something about disability or those kinds of topics. People can send that to me weeks after I did the initial edit for them too. I always welcome, customers coming back or clients coming back to me. So we have this very long-term relationship then, of a lot of back and forth before the book is finally published. But, it's happened very often now that people come back to me with their bios, their back cover blurbs also. One client, I told her that I think she could use a back cover blurb written for parents and one separate one for kids to read. And she liked that idea, so, and there are a lot of other things that editors can do for a book. We have a question about that later on, so maybe we'll have time to go into detail on that.
I'm curious how you would fit that in the book to have back cover blurb for the parents and the children. Were they both on?
I think they're both going to be on the back cover. Yeah, they're both going to be on the back cover. But one of them is going to be targeted for the parents to say, why would you want to buy this book? And the other one is about, hey, kids, you're going to have a lot of fun with this book. And here's why, and so.
I think Travis might be having slight heartburn thinking about the design of that. But I'm sure with someone as talented as you, Travis, they would make 2 blurbs work.
Yes.
Yeah, I tell you what, sometimes there's just not much space back there.
Yeah.
I can see the benefit of that. In fact, I have a copy of my book right here, and I was struggling so much with my blurb that all I put was like one sentence. You can see the header at the top. And then I put some bullet points under there. This book includes 14 words spelled out using American Sign Language. So it's more informational rather than what you might consider a traditional blurb. So
but I was going to say that the blurb for the kids would only be like 1 or 2 sentences. So it's not going to be, so, but it's because the person had already written that. It wasn't like I came up with this idea from scratch. It was like, she had material for this or that. And I was like, why not use what you have, but it's a lot of it is about being creative and thinking, how to market your book. You have another question about that later. You have, asking what kind of services I in particular offer. And so I would be talking about the marketing end of it and what editors can do for an author in that respect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the next question is, where am I? How does editing a children's book differ from other books? And I think our conversation has kind of covered that pretty well, but if you have anything additional that you want to add to that, feel free.
Well, the two most important things with picture books are making sure that the material as presented is appropriate for the targeted age range. And that is something that I am able to address very well as a developmental specialist, occupational therapist who's worked with kids with their schoolwork or ancillary to their schoolwork as an occupational therapist, helping them succeed better at their schoolwork. And I've worked with kids from preschool. Well, actually, I even worked with infants at some parts in my career, but from preschool all the way to pre-vocational kids with disabilities who are 21 years old in the public school system. So I have, experience understanding how material can be understood at different points in the age trajectory, but also reading level and cognitive level. So going back to that example with the dog, the story about the dog. So the boy mistreated the dog and excruciating details about what he did that was not nice to his dog. And then excruciating details about what happened to him when the dog saved his life and he had to go to the hospital. So the author originally wanted this to be targeted for kids 6 years and up. And I told her that I don't think that, the traumatic nature of the material would be appropriate for kids 6 years old, because it not only has to do with their reading level, which they might understand the words they're reading, but it also has to do with what is their life experience, how would they relate to the material based on what they've already experienced in their life. So it might go over their head, which isn't great, but it also might traumatize them to give them information that's premature. And so you have to think about these things. And so I was very honest with her. And I said, I really don't think that you can market this or target 6 years and up. And so she adjusted her age range. And then, of course, because she adjusted the age range, I was also able to adjust the vocabulary level and other things, in the way she wrote the book. So, they all are intertwined, but they're all definitely worth thinking about, especially the younger you get in the age range, because as Nikki pointed out to me, it's worth mentioning in this webinar that the difference between a 2 and a 3-year-old is humongous, whereas the difference between a 14 and a 15-year-old is not as big. So when you're thinking about writing books for very young children, you have to really think about what in their developmental makeup is going to enable them to absorb the information, what they're going to get out of it, and the impact it's going to have on them. So all of these things are very necessary to think about when you're writing even the simplest board book of 100 words. What are you saying? And for little kids, everything is an education. For them, I'm talking now as an OT. Play is learning. When you play, you are experimenting with the world. And when you pour that water, in the bathtub over and over again, with different sized bottles, later on, you'll be able to pour a glass of milk without being able to see how much is in the bottle, because you won't be able to feel it without actually seeing it. I meant container. But, so these things are very important the younger you get as well, because everything is a learning experience for little kids, and especially reading books. So, it sounds like a very simple thing to put a few words together and get some illustrations, but the impact that you will have on that kid is amazing. I try not to use the word amazing too much, but that's why I'm so excited about being in the children's author space at all, because we are having such an impact on kids with everything we publish, and in the indie space, we're able to publish things that have never been published before. So, all of that has to be respected. When somebody says, I wrote a children's book, you don't say, oh, it was only a children's book. It's just, every children's book is just as important as a young adult book or
Absolutely.
a chapter, So that's, I'm on my soapbox, but I hope you don't mind.
Not at all. No, this is the right space for that.
Travis, you sent us a list of questions ahead of time, and you asked the question related to artwork and editing. Should I address that now? Because I do have an answer for that.
If you'd like to, yeah,
I wasn't sure
absolutely.
I wasn't sure if that was
I
kind of
the
part
wording of it, but maybe you can just sum it up. Go ahead.
Well, I have the wording that you sent here. Is there
Okay.
editing related to artwork? And the answer to that question is there is, but most editors are not asked to do that. No one has ever once come to me as an editor and said, hey, can you review my book in its PDF format and see if there's anything that's not quite right about the text in relation to the artwork? And I'm going to explain why that should be done. In fact, I think it should be done 100% of the time. It doesn't have to be difficult or complicated or lengthy or costly. But this happened to me before I hired an editor. And something I discovered after I released my book and got some negative comments about it. So my first book as an author is called If My Nose Could Talk. And it was a very, very simple, silly book for very young children, ages 2 to 4. Very few words in it. It was rhyming. It wasn't a metered story. And what had happened was, I was an illustrator. So I illustrated my story based on the words, obviously. And I got to a page where this nose, by the way, the story is the nose pops off the girl's face. And so she's imagining what her nose would say if it could talk. And so I'm in this spread where this girl, she doesn't look like a human. She kind of looks more like a doll, is peeking through an office door. And the nose is sitting inside of a sand Zen garden on a desk that has like a chair, computer chair and computer on it. And so on the left side of the spread, it's from afar, and you could see the Zen garden with the nose in it, but he's pretty small, and you could see the character from far peeking in. And then on the right side of the same spread is a zoomed in version of the Zen garden, and you see the nose character chilling on like a beach chair. And you can see like the Zen garden rocks up close. And so the way I did this particular thing is I had a speech bubble coming out of his mouth on the right side of the page, which became a problem only because I separated a couplet. I separated a couplet. So if people don't know this, in rhyming stories, there's usually verses and couplets. Couplets are 2 lines that go together with a rhyming word at the end. What I did was I had, 1 couplet on the left, and then the opening line of the couplet on the right, the speech bubble, and then the second half of the couplet on the next spread. And what ended up happening was people were getting completely thrown off on the rhyming because they were reading the first half of the couplet, then the speech bubble, which totally broke it up, and then going to the next spread, and they had kind of lost the ear for the rhyming piece. And I ended up getting tons of, the rhyming wasn't that great. It wasn't the rhyming. It was my problematic placement of that speech bubble. And so what I ended up doing to fix it was I just shrunk the speech bubble and moved it to the left side of the spread. So, they read the first couplet, the speech bubble, which separated the 2, which is perfectly fine. This first line of the next couplet, and then continued on straight into the second half. And so if I had hired an editor to look at my text in relation to my illustrations, I'm pretty confident that would have been pointed out. So all this to say, I really hope and wish that more people would do that, because I have noticed similar things in published books and could easily be addressed during the editing process.
I also want to mention that, compared with illustrating, editing is not that expensive. People think it is because they compare it with paying nothing. If I don't get an editor, I don't have to pay anything. And if I pay an editor, how much am I really going to get for my money? And everybody knows that illustrations, and especially the book cover, are what sell the book. So they're very rightly comfortable with paying quite a bit of money for an illustrator. But if you pay a few $1,000s for an illustrator and you pay a few $100s for editing, when you compare the 2, I think that you're getting a lot of bang for your buck.
Yep.
when you have the book edited.
Yep. Emphatically agree.
Absolutely. And I think you have a good point that if you can add that aspect into the editing by looking at the artwork, and in fact, as a designer, I get asked that quite a bit, that would I take on the role as an art director and kind of oversee making sure that the illustrations themselves kind of line up with the text. And I do that to a point, but I also like to leave as much creativity to the illustrators as possible. So yeah, I think that's an interesting connection that maybe I was looking for between the editors, the designers, the illustrators, because it's all intertwined. And that's kind of the whole purpose of this series is that me as a designer, I can see how the book design is connected to every area of especially a children's book. So that's very interesting. Yeah. We touched on it earlier a little bit, but I want to go back to word count. And maybe you can just talk about this based on the age groups that a book is targeting, or that seems a big argument. How many words should go into a children's picture book? What do you think?
So we kind of said that I was going to, like Nikki and I said that I was going to be the one to talk about this.
Well, I'll just throw this out there that I suggested she take this on because she has the early childhood development education expertise and understands in a much deeper way how children can learn and retain and take in information.
Right. So we start with the traditional publishers who have actually drawn a line in the sand, and they will not, for example, they will not accept a board book that is more than 100 words because that is their, hard and fast. They're going to have a criterion. If you want to submit a board book to us, it has to be 100 words or less. And we're not even going to look at it if it's more. You don't have to worry about that so much with a book that you're self-publishing or that you have your own publishing company to publish. But you still are not going to want to make it too much more than 100 words because logistically it's a board book and that's what fits into a board book. So, for traditional purposes, board books, 100 words max, early picture books, 400 words max. That's what the publishing companies say. And nonfiction picture books, though, they can go up to even 3,000, but mostly 1,000 to 2,000 words if it's a nonfiction picture book, which is in a different category. And I think they understand that with a nonfiction book, you're going to be including much more information and more complex information. But that we also use that for my indie purposes. For if I'm advising an author on the word count for a picture book, then it's going to be usually somewhere between 400 and 600 words, whether it's not rhyming or non-rhyming. But if it's something about a complex topic, for example, I keep going back to the fish farm because it's one of my favorites. That one had a lot of information about what fish farming is. First, the history of fish farming, how it, centuries back, and then, what it looks like now. Of course, it's all being talked about by a catfish named Carl in rhyme. But we also have a lot of scientific words in there about, different ways of farming fish and the different types of fish and techniques. And then we have all the jobs that people can have as an adult in the fish farming industry. And the government wanted all of that in the story. And so it had to be a long rhyming story. It couldn't be short because the purpose of it is educational and informational. It's public health information almost, or at least public information. So, you have to think about what's the purpose of the book. What is the content like? How are you using content to advance your purpose? And what makes how many words it makes sense. Now, my daughter and I were just this morning talking about Dr. Seuss, and we were absolutely amazed at how many words a Dr. Seuss and even pages a Dr. Seuss book can have. Kids can absorb more with time, so he got away with it. But give an example, Nikki, of something we found out this morning. It's just amazing.
So we were looking at Horton Hears a Who.
Yeah.
And that one had what?
Over 2,000 words.
Yeah. I think there were something like 72 pages or something in that story.
Well, 72 pages, I think, was not even Horton Hears a Who. It was a different one.
That might have been One Fish, Two Fish. We looked at. Yeah. I think Horton Hears a Who was 3,000, and One Fish, Two Fish was 2,000.
But it was a lot more than we expected.
The point is that Dr. Seuss books are very long, and if the fact was that children at those ages can't comprehend or even have the attention span to read those lengthy books, those books wouldn't be as popular as they are. Like, this is not, back in the day, kids used to read these books because there was nothing else to do and TV didn't, blah, blah, blah. This is like kids today. My kids grew up reading these stories, having absolutely no trouble going from the first page to the last page without breaking eye contact from the book. So, and by the way, Mom, Robin.
And asking for more books, right? Asking for more books afterwards.
They wanted the whole Dr. Seuss series. Now, what I wanted to mention too, Robin, is that not all of his books were written in rhyme. And one of my absolute favorite books of all time of his isn't even a rhyming story. It's the story, I forget the name of it, but I have it. It's about the kind of this character who lives in a kingdom, and he can't take his hat off for the king. And he ends up taking the hat off, and there's another hat underneath, and he's constantly trying
500 hats of Bartholomew something.
Cubbins.
I got that from the recesses of my brain from years and years ago.
Yeah, so we have the story. It is long, okay, and it is not rhyming. And that was my favorite book growing up. So the point is that word count is not about comprehension when it comes to age. It's not about attention span, and I have kids that have ADHD, and they never had trouble with this. So I think that the traditional publishers have these very strict rules, but they're not, I don't know the reasons and the rationales for them, but all I could say is from my personal experience, those don't seem to have to do with a child's ability or interest in comprehension.
I agree with you. And I remember when I was writing Ada and the Helpers, I started out with over 1,000 words, I think. But then I started researching other books. And my kids, one of their favorite series is Berenstain Bears. And I think just about every book in that series is like 1,200 to 2,000 words each. They're long. And so I said, you know what? If they can handle those books, I think we can push the word count a bit. And I even try to push the vocabulary a bit as well, to include some longer words that maybe they haven't heard before, not completely throughout the whole story, but, a few here and there, I think is a good idea.
Well, we actually have had lengthy conversations about vocabulary and stretch words, which we like to call them. Robin, we're kind of over here, but do you want to throw in a couple of thoughts on stretch words and how they play into the editing process? Yeah,
so stretch words and the lower level of stretch words is vocabulary builders. So vocabulary builders are words that, are not too much of a stretch from the level that the child is reading on. But stretch words are really out there. They're words that even an adult might not know. So what we do is we make them understandable from the context of the sentence. So we make sure to put a stretch word in a sentence that has a lot of simple and familiar words.
Yep.
So that and we might even make them as part of a list of objects. So we have all this group of objects, and then we have this one outlier that the kid never heard of, but he can tell that it's part of that group. Like, speech therapists talk a lot about that, about categories. They teach kids about categories of words. There's a general word, clothing, and then there's like, shoes, and then within shoes, there's kinds of shoes, or dogs, kinds of dogs. So, we do that within context. And an editor is very good at knowing how to place the word so that kids have a better chance of understanding it within the context. And we like stretch words. We love them. And authors love them, and they're fun, and they're educational. And so, that is a wonderful thing. Now, there's another thing that I wanted to mention that I know as an occupational therapist, which is that when you read, your brain is doing something different than when you're looking at a video. So when you're looking at a video, your brain does not have to produce mental images. You just see what's on the screen and you drink it in. But when I read, let's say, Oliver Twist, I once was on the train, and the train was emptied out, the subway in New York, and I was reading a very heavy description in Oliver Twist that was so descriptive that I lost track of where I was, and I was completely in, my mind was completely in that scene that Dickens was describing, and the entire train emptied out, and I was the only one on the train. And it's a long story about what happened after that, but the reason is because the train was supposed to go to the last stop, and they changed their minds halfway through, and so the sign that was on the train was not true. I was in high school. Dickens got paid by the word, so that's why he wrote such descriptive paragraphs. But so what was happening is my mind was creating visual images as if I was watching a video, and so I was completely unaware of what was going on around me. So children do that when they're reading a book. Their ability to create mental images becomes more and more adept as they continue to read. And that's why kids need to read books and not just watch videos. So yes. I'm thinking, though, that when a kid is reading, is listening or reading to a story, or is reading or listening to a story that has a lot of words, in addition to the pictures that they're seeing, their brain is also generating mental images. And all of this is because the human brain is so complex, it's able to happen all at once and create a wonderful experience. So, we have to just know that that books are where it's at. That's the real ability of the brain to process information and to come up with new information and to be creative. Listening to a story or reading a story that's creative generates our own creativity too. And then kids who are reading books today can be authors in X number of years later. So I just want to say that it's very good to know how much is happening for the brain when a kid reads a book. And a lot of these books are usable in two different ways. They can be read to the child, or they can be read by the child. And that brings the age range much wider. And authors think about that a lot. A lot of them have that in mind when they contact me for editing. They say, I want this book to be able to be read to children from 3 years and up. But I also want kids in 1st and 2nd grade to be able to read it to themselves. And so an editor will be able to think about both of those purposes when they're editing the story.
Yeah, that's really great, because actually the book that I'm about to release, or that's on Kickstarter right now, Never Ever Build a Blanket For It, is it's written as kind of like an early reader's story. There's only like one sentence on each spread. And then I have this mini feature in the back of the story that would be more for the parents to read, to give a little more information. But the whole story is all about encouraging creativity, encouraging the kids to get away from the TV and do things and build things and be active and explore their imagination. So I totally agree. We need to be reading more to our kids and letting them be creative and explore that imagination. So that's right on point there.
I also like siblings reading to their younger siblings, or babysitters reading to the kids they're babysitting. There are a lot of different scenarios for kids having books read to them. So but think about these picture books, being able to be dual purpose. I think it's fantastic. So
I have a couple of questions that I did not give you. Some lightning round questions, we'll call them.
Oh no!
I don't know if I can do a quiz show.
Don't worry.
No, you'll be fine. I might test your memory a little bit, Robin. But the first question is, what was your favorite book as a kid? And you can both. I want you both to answer this question, so you can decide who goes first.
So my because I'm older, I get to go first.
I need a minute.
And I have to tell you, I'm not going to tell you my favorite book. I'm going to tell you my first impactful book that changed my entire life, and that was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It was my first.
Yes.
It was my first novel.
Yes.
When I was in 3rd grade or so, I read this. It's a chapter book, or it's not a picture book, and and I remember thinking, I wish they would make a movie out of this. And you know how long I had to wait for them to make a movie out of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?
A few decades. No, yeah.
But that revolutionized my life, because I had to create all my own mental imagery. I had to have, major reading skills for that. Yeah. And when I read that book, I was like, now I read a book. This was a book, a real book. And when I was a kid, every book was my favorite book. I took 6 books out of the library every week when I was in elementary school. And my mother, when she was not happy with me, would say, I'm reducing your ration from 6 to 2 books this week. You cannot have 6 books from the library this week because I'm not happy with you. I don't like what you did, whatever it was. You're only getting 2 books. And I said to her, how come not 0 books? She said, because that would be it would be torture for you to have 0 books. No, I have to give you at least 2 books.
Yeah.
So, but this is serious. I had, in addition to all my schoolwork, I read 6 books a week, which means that I was under my covers flashlight when my mother thought I was asleep also. But that also was because my family did not have television for religious reasons for years on end, and then they changed their minds. Very similar to what happened with me and my husband and my own kids. Nikki could tell you this. We had TV, we didn't have TV. My kids went to the movies for the first time when Toy Story came out, the original Toy Story.
Yes.
And they were already like preteens, had never seen a movie. Yeah. So every book was my favorite book. But starting with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that was a turning point in my life. Okay.
So I just finished reading the whole series to my 7-year-old, the Narnia series. It was definitely, we're jumping from picture books to the whole Narnia series. So it was quite a big jump. But I did that on purpose in a way because I wanted to start introducing longer stories and even stories without pictures so that he could start imagining these things. And I think there were a lot of parts and words in that series that were way over his head, but he loved it. He loved the whole series. He was able to grasp the story, and now we're reading Mark Twain, which is much more difficult than I remember it being. Tom Sawyer is wow. But I don't know how far we'll get with that with my 7-year-old.
I think with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis did the same thing as what the author of the Harry Potter books did. What's her name?
J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling. The first book is very simple and small. It was very funny. I remember reading the first Harry Potter book and laughing out loud in the subway. I was an adult that time in the subway. I wasn't a child anymore, obviously. But so that book was short and sweet and simple. And then as she continued the series, they became more and more complex. And I think she was thinking developmentally. I think she was thinking that as kids read her books, they're getting older and they're able to handle more. So I think C.S. Lewis did the same thing with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think some of those later books were more complex. But all right. How about Nikki?
So before I answer the question, I just want to say that I can only stay on for 10 more minutes.
Okay.
So I just want to.
Yeah, I know we're pushing the time.
We're over.
Yeah.
Second, I wanted to say, because I have the comments open, and Tanya, who's been watching this whole time, who's awesome, commented to you, Robin, saying that she loved your answer. And they just introduced their 4-year-old daughter to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and she's obsessed. Just wanted to say that. But my answer to the question, which I'll try to give quickly, I mentioned the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. Thank you for helping me remember that title. I absolutely loved that story. As a teenager or preteen, Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys were my absolute favorite books ever. I love the mystery and the detective elements of those, but there was one picture book that I was absolutely obsessed with, and it only existed in my grandmother's house. So my mom's, where she grew up, but that was not where we were all the time. I was only there occasionally. My grandmother used to read the story to me, and I've been on the hunt for it, and I've yet to find it because I can't figure out the title. I just remember what it's about. There's a dragon that lives under the floorboards of this house. And there, there was something about this story that just mesmerized me. And every time I went to visit my grandmother, I begged her to read it. And when I went back years later and we were trying to clear out the space, I was desperately looking for the book and could not find it. So,
By the way, my mom is 99 and a half now, survived COVID. She's a professional artist. We're writing a book together, she and I, and Nikki is going to be my book designer and formatter. Since you mentioned her, we might as well mention this. That I am becoming I'm working on some books. I have not published anything as of yet, but I have a few books in the works. And my one that I'm working feverishly on now, because I want to have it ready for her 100th birthday, is a book about Chinese brush art in rhyme. That's going to feature my mother's paintings, because my mother has expertise in many genres. But she had a bunch of Chinese watercolor paintings on rice paper, and I just saw her 3 weeks ago. I drove to her assisted living place, well, from Las Vegas to Los Angeles, 5 hours, and Nikki encouraged me to write this in rhyme. And it's going to be a very educational but fun book. My mother always wanted to be a book illustrator in her all of her years as an artist, and so hopefully she'll get her wish before her 100th birthday. We are calling the series the Art Detective series, and then we have the Earth Detective series, which I'm going to be writing about Republic Services recycling. They are doing amazing things in Las Vegas with recycling. And I edited a book a year or two ago about recycling in Jamaica and littering, Litterbug and the Cleanup Crew by Carrie Ann Willis, which is in rhyme. And she has, important facts about recycling and litter in the back of the book. That was another example of an educational addendum to the book. And so, I contacted the director of Republic, because I had just been on a tour with him, and he's very excited about me writing this book. So, those are my projects. You had, suggested that would be one of the questions of this, session. So I'm just squeezing that in. Since
that's really good. Okay. Thank you for mentioning that. That's really cool that you're doing this book with your mom. Do you know when you expect to have it completed and ready to publish?
So before she answers that question, I just want to point out that this is a 3-generation generational book. What's happening is my mom is the author, I'm the editor, my grandmother is the illustrator, I'm the designer and formatter, and the publisher. So my publishing company, Insegna Publishing, will officially be the publishing company for this book, for this series, which is the Art Detectives. Is that what we said we were called?
We're going to call it the Art Detective series.
Yeah. So I just think, and by the way, again, as my mom mentioned, my grandmother's about to be 100. So there's just so many cool aspects to this. And my grandmother has dreamed of being a children's book illustrator forever. And the fact that my mom has been sending books to her that I've created. And so it got her even more kind of excited at the concept or thought of doing this. So,
but also every time I edit a book that has watercolor illustrations that are incredible, I buy them, or sometimes the author gives them to me because I'm the editor, and I send them to her. And now she's sharing them with other residents of assisted living. She brings those books down with her like every few days, and everybody's enjoying them.
What's the answer to the question though, Robin? You said that we were hoping to have this book complete by the time I call her Bubby. My grandmother turns 100, which is September 2nd.
September 2nd is her 100th birthday. I already contacted Dianne Feinstein's office, her senator in in Washington, D.C. to get her on a list of people turning 100 who get a letter from the White House.
Speaking of which, so Robin is also going to be the marketing expert who creates the press kit for the book, talking about all of this. So
yeah,
I mean, it's just we're kind of the dream team here. Getting
ladies are doing everything here.
Well, we also want to involve the media. Lately, I've been doing projects in Las Vegas with press releases, and I did a blood drive and a January 6th vigil. There was only one January 6th vigil in Las Vegas, and I got the press release. I edited the press release, sent it out to the newspapers and TV stations, and there are actually TV stations who came to these events because of the press releases that I sent out. And I found that it's very interesting to interview people and find out exactly what they think the media would be interested in, why this is exciting. And so it's a lot, it's very similar to what I was doing with my book editing. So, I do hope that I'll be able to, get some media attention for my mom, and the fact that she's such an amazing artist. She did have an art show last year, May 2021. They did an art show in her previous assisted living place. I have pictures of it. They did a great job of showcasing her work, but it was only her Jewish themed work because it was a Jewish facility, and they were looking for new residents now that they had vaccines available and they could accept new residents. So, so she had an art show last year, but she realized that it was not the kind of art show that she wants. So I'm looking at, having a lot of her framed work shown in a gallery, one of the galleries in Las Vegas. They have quite a few galleries. And so, this is part of like a larger picture, but, my mother hopefully has lasted this long, survived COVID, and hopefully she will be with us for quite some time and be able to enjoy the fruits of our labors, all of our, collaborations, hopefully.
That's so beautiful. What's the name of the book, Art Directors Series? What's the name of it? Have you announced it?
Art Detective Series. So we don't have a title for this book yet.
Okay.
It's Chinese
Art Detective Series.
It's Chinese brush painting techniques. Basically, it's going to be showing kids about the kind of paper that's used, the kind of brushes, the kind of brush strokes. And then I have the most beautiful pictures, paintings that were not framed, of a tiger, a Chinese fire-breathing dragon. Her animals are amazing, and I think kids would really enjoy them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use those paintings to as examples of the techniques that we want to teach about in the rhyming story. That was our idea. And I have already contacted a subject matter expert, a lady named Nan Ray, who does this work and already wrote some children's books on the topic herself, illustrated ones. And so she is my consultant for this book to make sure that everything that I write about the techniques is accurate in terms of the paintings that I'm using to illustrate them. And I just ordered a new chop from her website for my mother to have her name in Chinese with a stamp, because we looked before the house was sold. Nikki and I looked in the house and we could not find the chop. So it's after 2 years of COVID, they're finally making them again, and it's going to be about $100. I ordered it online already. So she's still doing artwork, and she's still doing Asian themed artwork. So every time she does one, she'll be able to put that stamp on it. So it's an inspiring story of how not only you can live long, but you can be creative till your last day on earth, even if it's 99 plus years long.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's really awesome. Well, before I close it up, one more question, just one sentence answer. What was the last children's book you read? And we'll make it, what was the last published children's book you read, either to your kids or on your own or whatever? Can you think of the last one you read?
Does it have to be a picture book?
No.
You're going to widen it?
Oh, I've stumped you. I've stumped you both.
Well, it's because I haven't seen my grandchildren. I'm not around little kids to read. to read.
I told you I was going to test your memory a little bit.
For me, it's the opposite because we read so frequently that
Can't remember the last one.
I mean, chances are pretty high that it was an independent children's book. I just got like 2 or 3 in the mail. I know one of them was from Heather Robin. It was one of the books I edited for her, which was the Supermax's Ultimate Try, which is about a girl who learns how to play rugby. And then, there was another book I got just like a few days ago, and we read that too, and I'm completely drawing a blank. You want to try and answer the question? I'll see if I can recall.
Well, I am going to talk about a book that I think is amazing, that I read because I was tutoring my nephew who's in 7th grade, and with everything that's going on with Ukraine right now, this was an amazing book. It's called Inside Out and Back Again. It's written in free verse, which means that it doesn't have meter or rhyme, but it's in poetry form. And it's about a girl who lives in South Vietnam, who has to leave South Vietnam because of the takeover by North Vietnam. So it's a lot of what's, similar things that are happening with Russia and Ukraine happened with North Vietnam and South Vietnam. So it's very current today. It's in poetry, even though it's blank verse. And then it talks about how her family moves to the United States and becomes sponsored by a cowboy who doesn't even have cattle, and she feels gypped. And so she moves to the United States and has to, get used to a new culture, and so still be Vietnamese. So it has all of those elements that I love in the indie books that people give me to edit. And I was very taken by this book, especially because it's poetry. And it's also, appropriate for kids at younger ages, even younger than 7th grade, 5th grade, or even younger, because it's very simple language. But some of the words are stretch words. So I just felt like I should mention it because it will resonate with people, especially because of what's going on in, with Ukraine now. And people are talking a lot about with Afghanistan, what happened with, America pulling out of Vietnam is mentioned in this book. And, and we kind of, went round again with that last summer when we pulled out of Afghanistan. So all of these themes are very current, and, the cultural issues and the language, the poetry. I just thought it's not exactly, what you were looking for, but I really felt like it was worth mentioning. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. That's great.
I actually did remember, and I'll keep it super concise, but one of my, so Heather Robin is one of my favorite clients, I should say, but another one of my favorite clients, I could probably be butchering her last name because I don't think I've ever heard her say it, but Serena Siebenaler, one of my favorite people. I
think we have to say all your clients are your favorites, right?
They're all, of course. Yeah. I mean, Travis, you're, you're clearly a favorite too. No, but Serena is just, she's got such a spirit. I adore her, but the book that she wrote is Do Not Wish for a Pet, Do Not Wish for a Birthday Unicorn. Her first book was Do Not Wish for a Pet Ostrich, which I also edited, but she just sent me a hardcover copy of it. And my daughter Felicity, who is 7, has difficulty reading. We're not sure if it's dyslexia or something similar, but she's having a slightly more difficult time than her twin sister. And she loves reading this book. And I believe it's because it's in rhyme. It's metered really well. And it's just at an appropriate reading level. And so I find that well-metered stories that are also written in rhyming, that are rhyming well, definitely helps with learning. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as a last thought, but I thought about it when I was thinking of this book. And
it's also about music. Like it's similar to music, and studies have shown that kids with autism, for example, can absorb instructions and structure of explaining what needs to happen, like in class or whatever, when I used to sing instructions to kids when I was working with them years ago with those kids who had autism. So, younger kids and really anybody de-stresses by listening to music, and, poetry and rhyming stories have that same power. So that's why, you can see that there's a theme here. I'm constantly putting in a plug for writing rhyming stories and getting them for kids.
We're both big fans.
Yes.
But of course, we can't let that overshadow the whole topic of children's picture books.
Yeah.
And, so hopefully we struck some kind of balance, I hope.
Yes. Thank you so much, Robin and Nikki. I'm going to stop us there. But I also want to just say RobinKatzEditor.com, I believe is the right website.
Yes. www.robinkatzeditor.com.
WordWiz.
WordWiz.com. You could use WordWiz for the same website, because we bought the domains for both.
It's word-wiz.
Yes,
word-wiz.com,
right,
which directs to the same website.
Right. People can also contact me through my Facebook page, Facebook.com/Robin Katz Editor.
It's also under the name of WordWiz. So the Facebook page name is WordWiz, and the Facebook page URL is facebook.com/Robin Katz Editor.
Okay.
And the amazing website, the very cheerful and playful website, and visually beautiful, was designed by Nikki Filippone, and my WordWiz logo was also designed by Nikki Filippone. And you can also send me manuscripts directly without even asking me in advance to robinkatzeditor@gmail.com.
Okay. And Nicole Filippone author.com is where they can find your books. These links, I think, are all in the description of the video, so they can find them there. If they're not there now, they will be later. The replay will be available for a limited time. Thank you so much, Robin and Nikki, for joining me for this. Again, for the giveaways, if you're registered, which is really the only way you can be watching this video, if you're registered and you make if you back my Kickstarter campaign, I'll be doing a giveaway. One person will receive Nikki's newest book, Paisley the Perfectionist. When does it come out?
I'm working feverishly to finish it. I'm hoping that it's going to be within the next 4 months.
So one person will receive that, and one person will also receive Robin Katz $25 credit to editing fees, which covers about 30 minutes. And I would love to give me permission, because I didn't ask you about this. If I can reach my daily average goal of $1,600 tomorrow, which will be my first week of campaign, I would also like to give a copy away of the Artist Detective book when it comes out to someone, because that's a really special book. So I'd like to do that. I'll be buying all 3 of those services and books from you to give to the watchers here, whether I reach my goal or not. But just to help push my campaign a little bit. So thank you so much to both of you.
You're very welcome. I was thrilled to be here.
Yep, it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
This was a lot of fun.
And educational, just like children's books are.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. And thanks for watching, everyone. And we'll see you on Thursday for Illustrated by Design with my illustrator for the latest book, Lee Dixon. So go to launchmissioncreative.com/webinars to sign up for that. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.